Hello, my dear friends. In this video, we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's get started. First, we're going to talk about the Vasilovka direction, where the Russians, as a result of an offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement called Vka. Additionally, Russian sources published a video providing real proof that the Russians had indeed gained control over this territory. This is a very interesting video, and I would like to point out several things. Firstly, in this video, we can see two Russian soldiers raising the Russian flag in almost the northernmost part of the settlement. Another important detail I would like to draw your attention to is that there are two soldiers in the bottom right corner of the video. These Russian soldiers appeared very cautious, keeping a sharp lookout and controlling the entire perimeter around the area. This suggests that the Ukrainians were most likely very close to this territory or that Ukrainian drones were flying above the same building. This video confirms that, at least by the end of the 23th of January, the Russians had managed to reach the northern outskirts of Vka. However, it's likely that heavy clashes were still occurring within the settlement at that time. By the morning of the 24th of January, defense sources reported that the Russians had managed to improve their position and gain full control over the village of Vka. During the previous night, the Russians entered and reached the northern outskirts of the settlement. Furthermore, according to the information we have, the Russians established complete control over the farms located to the west of the settlement. Regarding pro-Russian sources, this morning, according to Ukrainian time, pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian sources reported that the Russians, as a result of their offensive operation, managed to cross the Mialy River and take control of the central part of the village of Vasilovka. Summarizing everything, by the morning of the 18th of January, it is likely that the central part of Vasilovka was captured by the Russians. Now, let's discuss other important details. According to the information we have, the Ukrainians in the southern part of Vasilovka received orders to retreat. During the previous night, when the Russians had the last opportunity to control and carry out reconnaissance operations, the Ukrainians began retreating in the northern direction with the goal of crossing the Mray River in the northern part of Vasilovka and then moving further towards the company's stronghold located to the northwest of the settlement. Furthermore, according to the latest information over the past 2 hours, the Russians have managed to improve their positions on the northern flank of Vasilovka and have shortened the distance to the farms in the northern part. The Ukrainians will try to hold these territories as long as possible because, currently, these farms are the main base, the main stronghold for the Ukrainian armed forces. The Ukrainians can use these farms to secure the evacuation and retreat process. If the Russians manage to take this territory by the end of the 18th of January and gain complete control, then the Ukrainians would be caught completely. For now, there is just an operational encirclement, but with control over this territory, there would be a complete encirclement. Currently, the Russians are trying to carry out several offensive operations in this direction. More precisely, there are 4 offensive operations. The first one is the Russians trying to improve their positions in the central part of Vasilovka. The main goal of this attack is to cut off the central part of Vasilovka and prevent the Ukrainians, who are currently located in the southern part of the settlement, from evacuating and entering the northern part. Another offensive operation involves the Russians attacking the company's stronghold located in the northwestern direction of the settlement. There are very heavy clashes, close combat, with the Ukrainians attempting to counterattack the Russians. The main objective of these attacks from the Russian side is to slow down the Ukrainians and prevent them from unblocking their forces that are currently trapped in the cauldron in the village of Vasilovka. This is akin to an element of active defense, where the Russians are attacking to reduce the Ukrainians' ability to carry out counterattacks. The Russians in the territory of the small agglomeration are also advancing from the northern part, as we discussed a minute ago. The main purpose of this attack is to secure the northern part of Novoselka and take control of the northern farms. If the Russians are successful in this, then the Ukrainians who are currently located in the northern part of the settlement would be trapped in a cauldron as well. Furthermore, the Russians began their 4th offensive operation. Regarding these maneuvers, the Russians are trying to advance in the direction of the Mray River with the aim of crossing the river and then attacking the settlement of Novochata. As for these maneuvers, it's difficult to understand the exact objectives the Russians are trying to achieve. However, it's clear that this is a long-term ongoing operation, which likely means that the Russians began preparations for further offensive operations in the direction of the Zaporizhia and Dnipro regions from this territory. Thus, the attacks on Novochata and Sikna are part of something new. They are not part of the Vasilovka offensive operation but rather the beginning of the next stage of the upcoming offensive operation, which will take place after the fall of the settlement of Elka. Now let's move on. As for the Kara direction, during the past 24 hours, we haven't received much new information, just one video from the vicinity of the settlement of Star. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians and Russians were bombing and attacking the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. The video took place in an area that was colored in Russian favor. So, as of now, we have some doubts about whether this territory is under complete Russian control or whether the video is archived. Anyway, despite who controls this territory, most likely, sooner or later, this entire pocket will be colored in Russian favor. Now, let's move forward and discuss the second most important direction during these days, the PAX direction. During the previous night, pro-Ukrainian Deputy Maria Biza, who is very famous by the way, reported that the Russians managed to enter the city of Pokrovsk. During the previous night, we haven't received any video confirmation or confirmation from any other sources that the Russians managed to do this. However, this information is interesting, and maybe today, on the 24th of January, someone will provide geolocation that can confirm this. The main clashes during the previous night took place between the settlements of Yudacha and Chu. As you can see, there are many flags, indicating a lot of changes on the ground. Both pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mappers reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and take at least 50% of the industrial zone in the northwestern part of Chu under complete control. Furthermore, the Russians, according to mappers from both sides, advanced along the railways in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk from the west. Additionally, according to the information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the village of Zova, taking this small village in pincers. Let's take a look at how the map changed. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 23th of January, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 18th of January. As for proof, we still haven't received a single video confirming this Russian progress, but nevertheless, this information is very interesting. Furthermore, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to take full control of the industrial zone located in the northeastern and southeastern parts of the settlement of Vashin. I'll remind you that the main purpose of the Russian offensive in this direction is simply to secure the flanks and prevent the Ukrainians from launching a counterattack on the Russians from behind, while the main Russian forces are advancing in the direction of Sikna. After the fall of the village of Sikna, and when the Ukrainians are forced to retreat from this territory, the Russians will most likely continue advancing westward toward the village of Vok, as the distance between the village of Vok and the border of the Dnipro region is already less than 3 kilometers. The Russians continue advancing along the line of settlements named Nova Cherka, Vasilka, and the village of Usova. According to information we have, during the past 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions, and currently, they control up to 50% of the settlement of Uzanova. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians of the 59th Brigade were using FPV drones to attack Russian units within the settlement. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in favor of the Russians. The situation for the Ukrainians in the Piz direction is critical. We see that the Ukrainians can't stabilize the situation, and every single day, it is getting worse and worse for the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move forward. We received several updates from the city of Tzk. The Ukrainians, after withdrawing, are attempting to pin down the Russian units within the settlement to prevent them from completing their clearing operations before the Trump's inauguration. There are still very heavy clashes in the area of the mine. However, this morning, on the 24th of January 2025, some very reliable pro-Russian sources reported that the Russians had established complete control over the settlement of KMKY. If this information is correct, this means that the mines, the task mine, were encircled from the south, southwest, southeast, and east, and are about to be outflanked from the north. So, we strongly believe that by the Trump inauguration, the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from this territory as well. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their position in the settlement of Novoselka. Ukrainian sources published a video showing how they were attacking and bombing Russian units in the central part of the village using FPV drones. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in favor of the Russians. Now let's move on. As for the Sea of Chasar, we have adjusted the map in favor of the Ukrainians. If you remember, during the past several weeks, we discussed that the Russians managed to encircle the Ukrainians in the microdistrict of Nor and in this forest. This information was provided to us by pro-Russian resources around 2 weeks ago, but today, these pro-Russian resources have adjusted their map in favor of the Ukrainians, saying that there is no longer an encirclement in this territory. To tell the truth, we had some doubts from the beginning about whether there was any encirclement or not, but according to our policy, we added this polygon to the map just to understand what might happen in this direction. Now, the picture becomes much clearer, and according to this configuration, there are very heavy clashes, but there are no cauldrons in this area. The Russians continue their offensive in the direction of this forest, trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back. The Russians are saying that the situation for the armed forces of Ukraine in the Sea of Chasar in the central part is critical. The Ukrainians confirmed this information, stating that they will most likely be forced to retreat from this territory very soon because the Russians have managed to establish complete control over the industrial zone, which was the core and base of the entire defense of the city of Chasar. Without the industrial zone, the Ukrainians have no chance of holding their lines for a very long time. The Russians have begun another fast, lightning, and full-scale offensive operation in the Lon direction. During the past 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly to the west of the settlement of Ivanovka. At least, this information was provided to us by neutral mappers. We see a significant number of geolocations and videos from the same area. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian company strongholds with the use of T-flamethrower systems. This is very important, and we see that currently the Russians are trying to attack in the northern direction from their foothold in the vicinity of Ivanovka. Once again, it is likely that the Russians are planning to outflank the dense network of Ukrainian fortifications in the vicinity of Novoselka from behind. This will allow the Russians to cut and encircle the Ukrainians in this area. Ultimately, this advance by the armed forces of the Russian Federation could force the Ukrainians to retreat toward Novomykova. The main task and purpose of these maneuvers is to connect several footholds on the Ukrainian side of the River Jet, from the settlement of Ivanovka to the settlement of Maka. If the Russians are able to create this huge foothold, they will have no problem advancing further in the western direction towards the town of Lyman and the town of Isom. Now, let's discuss the situation in the northern Sine direction. According to the information we have, the Russians have managed to improve their positions slightly in the vicinity of Zaga. As for the Suja direction, during the past 2 hours, we haven't received anything special. The sources reported that there are very heavy clashes in the territory of these pocket pots, but there are no changes on the ground.